In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at Tyson Fury's younger brother, Tommy Fury, and his upcoming bout with YouTuber-turned-boxer Jake Paul. The match has officially been set up for December 18, 2021, and will be the make or break for both fighters. Can Jake Paul prove to the boxing world that he is a legitimate contender in the ring, or will blood prove thicker than water as Tyson Fury tries to train his brother for the night of his career? Let's dive into it and find out. Two sides of the same coin. What makes this fight so interesting is both of them are in the same boat. Both boxers have undefeated records, but neither have fought what many would call a legitimate opponent. One could say that this fight is to make or break both fighters. For Fury, he is a member of the boxing royal family, and if he can't defeat a YouTube wannabe boxer, it may be curtains on his career. According to John Fury, Tommy's father, he will make him retire, saying, "No pressure, Tommy lad, but let me tell you, you will be called Tommy Fumbles as well. If it's a close fight, Tommy's retired." Harsh words to hear from your father, I'm sure, but the expectations for Paul are not much lower. Boxing personalities have spent the entirety of Paul's pro boxing career doubting him as he has only fought less than difficult opponents. However, this fight changes everything for him. If Paul can manage to defeat Fury, he will not only remain undefeated, but he would prove to the boxing world that he can be a pro boxer. Fury has spent his entire life training to be a pro boxer, while Paul has only recently taken up the sport. It will be quite the impressive feat if Paul can manage to pull it off, but it will also be quite the humiliating fall from grace for Fury if he fails to defeat Paul. So what do pros think of the fight, and who do they predict to win? What are the pros saying? As we said earlier, the pros are calling this a make or break fight for the careers of both combatants, being the first opponent of note for both of them, but not too many pros are placing their bets on former YouTube sensation to beat the boxing star. For starters, both John Fury and Tyson Fury believe that the fight will be an easy win for Tommy, saying that this kid would murder Jake Paul. He'd be on a life sentence. He'd be on a murder charge when he fights Jake Paul. Although it is biased, as they are related to Tommy, they technically would be the best people to judge his game. If they're saying it's heads and tails better than Paul's, they are probably onto something. And as we saw earlier, John Fury has no problem voicing his true feelings about the fight, regardless of his family ties to Tommy. However, former UFC fighter Michael Bisping chimed in about Jake Paul, saying that he's a boxer. He used to be a YouTuber, probably still is one, but he's also a boxer. He also went on to say that if Fury struggled against Anthony Taylor, he's gonna struggle against Jake Paul. That's just my 2 cents, and I believe he loses. George Lockhart, nutritionist for UFC fighter Conor McGregor and boxer Tyson Fury, said that Tommy Fury surrounds himself with boxing fame and completely makes his life about boxing, which will give him an edge in the fight. Lockhart called it the boxing equivalent of sitting with the hard kids at lunch in school. Lockhart later went on to say that Fury 100% does a job on Jake Paul, absolutely certain of that. Fight promoter Frank Warren also sided with Fury's camp, claiming that Fury will be just too much for Paul to handle, also saying that while both of the fighters are still novices and have lots to learn, Paul will not be able to stop Tommy Fury. With all these boxing pros having their say heard, what do we think is going to happen when these two duke it out later this year? So what's our prediction? Here is a not so hot take on the fight according to what we just heard from boxing pros, but the odds of Jake Paul pulling out a win in this fight seem rather low. The cards are definitely stacked against Paul, and while one has to admire his passion for the sport and his drive to want to be a pro boxer, he honestly does not have much of a chance against Fury. If you ask us, we here at the channel are putting our money on Tommy Fury. And just between you and me, I hope Jake Paul gets an absolute beatdown laid on him. Hashtag Team Fury all the way. But hey, don't tell my boss I said that. The career of Tommy Fury. Tommy Fury is the younger brother of heavyweight boxing legend Tyson Fury. While Tommy is obviously less well known than his kin, Tommy will sport a very respectable 7-0 record in pro boxing. Not to mention that 4 of these 7 wins were knockouts. Despite such a great pro career to date, Tommy actually struggled in his early years of fighting, but not with the actual fighting portion. Tommy struggled to find opponents willing to step in the ring with him, so he only had 12 amateur bouts in his entire amateur career. Granted, he did very well in those 12 fights, advancing to the Northern Finals and winning them twice. It wasn't long after those initial bouts that he made his way to the pro boxing world, where his first 4 fights were an astonishing success, all resulting in wins, one by split decision, and the other 3 by technical knockout, TKO stoppages. Tommy Fury's 7-0 pro record, while impressive, is presented with an asterisk by most boxing personalities, as he has never fought anyone of note. His opponents, while obviously talented athletes and extremely dedicated fighters, were no match for Fury, and had nowhere near the notoriety of a fighter such as Fury. For reference, his first 2 opponents had a combined record of 10, 128, and 5, with a winning percentage of .07. They really never should have been allowed to step in the ring with a member of boxing royalty. People in the boxing community are putting a great deal of weight into this fight for both Fury and Paul, because for both fighters, this is the first real boxer either of them have faced in their young careers. And while it could be Fury's first step into becoming a superstar boxer like his brother, it also could do the same for Jake Paul. The career of Jake Paul. Obviously, Jake Paul stepped into the public eye as a YouTuber and has now found his way into pro boxing. The former YouTube star has a record of 4-0 in pro boxing and has another win to his name in his only amateur bout. While 4-0 sounds good on paper, Paul's record should also be taken with a grain of salt due to his opponents also being obvious underdogs compared to Paul. Paul has received some skepticism due to his opponents always being hand-plucked by him. Paul has chosen who he fights in all 4 of his pro fights, which leads most in the boxing world to think that he picks opponents who he knows he can beat. In his first pro bout, Paul chose to battle Anestin Gibb, a YouTuber believer that really had no business fighting Paul, but because it was Paul's first pro fight, the lopsidedness of the battle was not as obvious. In Paul's next fight, he picked former NBA star Nate Robinson. While this seems like the fight could be fair, as Robinson was a pro athlete in years prior, people did not stop to think that basketball and boxing have absolutely nothing to do with each other, making Robinson a relatively easy opponent for Paul, as he knocked him out in the second round. Paul then earned his third fight in classic Jake Paul fashion. He ran his mouth on social media because Jake Paul has no idea how to close his loud mouth. It proved a successful strategy for him, however, as he chose to battle former Bellator MMA competitor Ben Askren. The legitimacy of the bout was questioned as Askren's advanced age brought along questions. While Askren was a legit combat sport professional, he was 13 years older than Paul and was not a boxer, but a wrestler. While that is much closer to boxing than basketball, it is still a completely different sport. And that was evident when Paul knocked out Askren in the first round of their fight. Paul's fourth and most recent fight came against yet another handpicked opponent, former UFC welterweight champion Tyron Woodley. This fight brought up the same question as the fight prior, as Woodley was even older than Askren at age 39, and was also a pro wrestler in his career and had never boxed professionally before. Paul found victory in a split decision, with two judges ruling in favor of Paul and the other ruling in favor of Woodley. Most people in the boxing community find Paul as being an illegitimate boxer who only picks fights against opponents he can easily beat, while also making it seem like they have a chance due to their former athlete status. But both Paul and Fury's reputation and boxing prowess will be put to the test in Miami, Florida on December 18th when the two clash in the ring. And that's our list. Do you agree with what the pros have to say about this fight? Who do you think will win? Let us know in the comment section below. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you all in the next video.